Yes?
Just about. It's coming in. There it is.
Okay, coming in hot. Okay, so Anne showed us a version of the StudentAid application. Since then, we've done a few more tweaks to it, but we didn't want to bring that back this week because it's just a little bit, just tiny tweaks. And inevitably, there'll be more work done on it, but we showed you that. And the student site navigation, so what it looks like for a student to move around the website. The devs showed us their backup strategy and some of the work done in Camunda needed to configure an award. And Sue Mati was largely responsible for getting that work all ready for our team. And Andrea highlighted some important thinking around accessibility and mobility, and that conversation has continued into this sprint, so we have a little bit more to show you there. Roop walked us through our first draft of confirmation of enrollment for institutions, and Lynn showed us the student site app. Ringing a bell? Okay. So, Elise, I'm going to pass it over to you and just remind you that your section, you have 5 minutes.
Oh, right. Okay. So just a quick reminder, this is Sprint 13, and we were focusing on what we've often referred to as document upload in the application. We need to set up the package that is a program year. We were going to do some work on income validation. The UX team, as Michelle mentioned, more work on accessibility. They've also done some work, and we're excited to show you today a notice of assessment. We'd hope to get to reporting a withdrawal, but we're not quite done that, but we have started that work, and also confirming tuition remittance. So huge amount of progress. As you can see, we're getting close to disbursement here. And then of course the dev team have built out permanent disability, which we're going to show you this morning. This is when we request it, as well as the student application acceptance criteria, and the ability for institution users to view a summary of the student application. So we've been really busy. Just a couple of things, remind you, in my usual kind of statements. So I did just want to make sure that folks were aware, as you know, we made a decision about enabling the ability for PD status to be verified outside of an application. But what we're also going to show you is a really neat feature where we have put that in at the beginning of account creation so that students can request their PD be verified as early as possible. And at the same time, we'll also be checking back with SFAS and that data repository to see if the student hasn't already had their PD status verified so that we can gather that information as early as possible in the process. We've also going to show you a little bit today about our solution for how we know whether or not this application is a full-time or a part-time. You may hear us refer to that as intensity. And also just want to remind folks about the tuition remittance. Remember, this was another area where we had a strategic opportunity to improve our transparency. And so the goal was that as much as possible, we give the opportunity a chance for the student to opt out of that. And so we're going to show you that today, how we plan on doing that. And again, some of the language you might see needs to be tweaked a little bit. There's probably a spelling mistake here and there in some of the different places. So please point it out in the chat as you see it as we move through this. We are working quickly, but this is not the final version, obviously. And what you're seeing is that we're rebuilding and reusing those pathways as much as we possibly can, and not building a whole bunch of side roads. So sometimes we're making decisions to keep things in one process rather than building another one, which is a different approach than what we've used in the past. I think that's my 5 minutes, so I'm going to stop.
Good job, Elise. Okay, Andrea, I'm going to pass the mic over to you. You've done some work shoveling through notice of assessment and working to simplify that process.
Yes, thank you. I started out by meeting last sprint with Rebecca Fontaine a few times and Tatiana, and we had a look at the current state. We talked about what students need to know, and particularly where they get confused and where they get tripped up, and when they call in questions that they ask that they're confused about. So how we could make it simpler, and also what needed to be there and what could be removed that wasn't necessary information. I started with taking the current state. It was plain language, and then just started rearranging it into a simplified form. So when students log in, the first thing they see is really what they're most interested in is how much money did I get? And then they can drill down, open up the sliders, and they can find out a breakdown of how much, when they will receive it, how they were assessed, what they need to know, if there's any conditions or restrictions, and then what they need to do. There's links to everything where they can go to do their create their login account for MSFAA. Screw that up. And yeah, so this is just very first draft. When Rebecca returns from vacation, I'll need to go by this with her, but very first cut.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
So the devs will be taking a stab at getting that into the system next sprint. Just the basics there. Yeah.
Can I just add that if you just scroll back up a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, just so folks you're seeing the amount, and then each of those pieces open up like an accordion, so students can get access to that if they want, or they can leave it closed depending on what they want to look at. Plus, we'll also obviously make sure that it is printable, given that we know that students use that. So just in case you were wondering.
Yep. And Lynn, you're going to share some efforts on program intensity.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. So good morning, everyone. So in the last few sprints, you have seen the foundational design for education programs. Since then, we conducted usability labs with the public institutions. For this sprint, we added an additional business requirement, although not so additional, that it just needs to be a requirement to address programs that offer full-time and part-time studies. So with that, we took also the opportunity to make minor improvements based on the usability findings. So more explanation text and some ensured that the language reflected the button action, things like that. So let's take a look at the additional requirements we added. So as you remember, here are the education program wires. If you click on new program, you go to this page here where then you can input your program information. Where you see new is what we kind of made adjustments on. So zooming in closer on the program information form, we're asking a question if this program does offer it on a part-time basis. Now, if you do answer yes, what it's going to look like on what we used to call offerings. We have another question on here that says, how will this be offered? So for example, if you answered part-time in the program information, you'll also get the second question for the offering, how will this be offered, part-time or full-time? So that's how we're addressing it on the institution side of things. So the idea is that the institutions input information about the program. Now, once it's in the system, let's scroll here. Once it's in the system, the students will see that information populated on their side as well. And so we've also then made changes on the student side, just minor changes. So I'll just walk you through the student application side as well, how we're addressing the intensity or also the part-time and full-time. So here's the student experience. They put in their school that they're attending. They're selecting their program from a drop-down list. They've selected it, and now this display appears. Now, once they select their program, they'll be asked a question, how will you be attending this program, part-time or full-time? Now, depending on what they answer here, part-time or full-time, it'll just display the dates based on that previous answer that they answered up here, so that it just filters down the study dates for them, and they don't have to guess, essentially. I know that this is looking a bit text heavy up here. We just want to make sure students know where they land on in terms of part-time or full-time. So just giving them a little bit of help in terms of how they could possibly calculate that themselves so that they're not calling us or the schools. In the future, I think we can look at having some eye icons to click on, and maybe it reveals some more information. But again, this is just the start of it. We just want it on the screen first to see. So this is the student experience. If there is no, if they don't know if the program that they is not listed, then they'll just add in additional information so that that once they put in their program name, program description, their start and study date, they can also say this program they're attending is part-time or full-time. Once they put that in, it'll go back to the institutions just to say, okay, they want to just check those. That's kind of the program information request process that we've kind of built in. So students, if they aren't able to find their program, we'll ask them this question, they'll input some information, then they'll pass it over to institutions to check. So in a nutshell, that was quick, but that was the intensity that we have added for full-time and part-time.
Yes, thanks, Len. And we'll show that to you again once it's built, the whole story, so that it makes sense all together. Elise, did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
Just to remind folks that the program information request would replace the Appendix 3. So just so you know, Ronald, I noticed your hand. I'm just wondering if you could maybe put the question in the chat and we'll come back to it at the end if that's okay. Great. Thanks, thank you.
Roop, you're going to tell the room about tuition remittance.
Yes, let's talk about that. So tuition remittance, that's all I want to share. One sec. What I wanted to talk about today was tuition remittance. It kind of dovetails into the conversation that of the stuff that I showed last week, which was the confirmation of enrollment, declining, all of that. So if you are going to go through that process, we're now viewing an application from an institution's point of view. And so what you're going to do is we're going to hit the application actions button, and then we're going to edit the application. So tuition remittance is one of these things where the institution can take some of that money that that student is going to be receiving and have it directly go to them rather than directly into that student's account, the bank account, let's say. So it's kind of one of these things where we allow for it, but we don't really want to incentivize it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make them edit the application to update the remittance amount. The key here is we're trying to, again, not really incentivize doing this. And what this is going to do is create a new a program information request, essentially. And there's potential that it would kick off another reassessment. So it's another kind of disincentivizing this if it changes too much, right? So when you come in here, you'll notice here you can kind of confirm their program, the student's program and study period or intake here. And then down at the bottom, there's this new section here called Update Tuition Remittance. If the intake already has a remittance amount, that this will automatically be defaulted to yes. And they'd be able to see the amount that's within the intake that was already autofilled based on what they've already entered. And then they can edit that to, I don't know, whatever value they need. Anything that doesn't exceed the education cost for the study period. So they would just enter that amount right in here and hit update. They'll get a little confirmation that says, by the way, just so you know, this is going to require some confirmation and it may require an assessment, a reassessment. Basically, we're kind of just ensuring that they understand that this goes back to the student and they're going to have to accept these changes. So making sure you've done it right and making sure, again, that there's transparency for the student to understand why is this remittance taking place, making sure that they understand all of the things that go behind the scenes so that we're not just taking money right at the last second during confirmation as the previous way of doing things. Yeah, so right here you just continue and submit, and then it would have been submitted right to the student who can then confirm the remittance amount and accept the change. That's tuition remittance.
Thanks, Roop. I see we've got some good questions coming in that we will get to if Elise doesn't already answer them in the chat. And I'm going to reshare my screen here. Okay, and Andrew, you just had some quick things to say, I believe, on what we've been up to this week on Command knowledge transfer. How did that go?
Yeah, so one thing we did, related to what Michelle had said earlier, with Samati unfortunately leaving us, part of what we did was taking some time to basically suck all the knowledge out of her brain of what she did for us and really know the ins and outs and the best practices she followed, because Samati did do a lot of heavy lifting on this for us, followed just very standards, very like just well-known industry standards about how to do things, how to name things. So basically just sharing with the team just basically practices to follow and all that stuff, and really getting everybody as familiar as possible with how things work. What you'll see below there is one of the big things that we did focus on this sprint. That is effectively what we call like the assessment integration piece. So with this, what it basically does is we're using Camunda, which again is our rules engine, to basically orchestrate the life cycle of the application. So after submit, what are the things that happen? What do we have to wait for? What other information do we have to get? For example, program information request, maybe family information, CRA, income validation, those types of things. So what this is basically a process at the beginning of the application sort of submission process, which just steps through that and handles the life cycle of it. The things to note there that are important is those two black boxes called calculate assessment, otherwise known as calculate assess need, and calculate award. So the last two sprint demos, we had showed some pretty beefy looking workflows about some calculations on how to do the assess need, how to do the configure award. So those fit into this one. So the idea here being that we're looking at one complete life cycle of the application, and during different parts, it will go off and do whatever's needed within this sort of master controller of the application. The last big thing we did as a team here that's not necessarily worth a huge demo is that application acceptance criteria Michelle also mentioned at the start. So most of this, it's not necessarily that we did make some visual tweaks and some different things like that, but a lot of it was like sort of some different validations, some different like field consistencies, just a lot of like little things that aren't explicitly needing to be called out, but just as we showed last week about how we were doing different validations, just cleaning them up, making them a little better and consistent. And yeah, that was just some of the big background things we did this spring.
Awesome. And by the way, we always knew Samati would be leaving and that we just had her part-time for a short period of time. It's not because she doesn't like us, just so you know. Okay, so Anne is going to show us permanent disability, but I wondered, Elise, did you want to level set the room on this one or just go for it?
Sorry, which one? I was typing.
Permanent. That's okay. Permanent disability.
Permanent disability. Yeah. So just a reminder, permanent disability. So we had in one of our mini projects was to make a business decision about whether or not we would enable the ability to assess permanent disability outside of the application. And the business decision through our leadership was, yes, we did want to enable that ability. And so we've been working with SABC, who are just amazing partners in this process, to make sure that we have a process. And the rationale for that is that we want students to have their PD status assessed as early as possible so that they can get access to the funding that they're eligible for as early as possible so that they can be successful, right? It's not fun getting a PD status in October and now you've already spent 2 months not getting the services that you need to be successful. So we want to give that to students as early as possible. The other piece, of course, is it also reduces the amount of reassessment that we have to do. So the earliest possible we can get that information. So what we're going to show you is the idea that, as I mentioned in the business context, that when an account is set up by a student, which is going to happen for all students on day one with this new system, The system, as after they sign in using their BC Services card, the system is then going to go and check the data repository and gather some information. And one of the key pieces of information is whether or not that particular student has been assessed for PD status previously, because obviously we wouldn't want them to have to do that again. So Anna's going to show you what that looks like here. And then they will also have the ability to initiate a verification from their account without having to go into an application. And they can do that at account setup, or they could do that at a later date as well. All right, and take it away. Show us what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
We can.
So when a student logs into the system, he can go to the profile. And if the student's SIN is validated from CRA, and also if he has not applied for the PD status earlier, like we are not getting the PD status from SFAS DB, then he or she will be having this button to apply for PD status. So when they click,
Murphy's Law.
I think
Right,
some
Ann?
Yep.
issues happening. Let me check the postman of SFAS. Sorry, ATBs.
Just while Anne's checking that, just some background on this too. This is a new thing from the ATBC side thing as well. So they are also in development. So some sort of blips over the next several weeks at least are not unexpected.
I guess ATBC is down, like I'm getting a bad gateway.
Okay.
Well, we can try
Uh,
again next week.
Maybe I
The next
can
week.
like I will change the status from the DP and I can show like how it will be looking.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So when they click apply for PD status, an API call will be sending to ATBC server, and it will create this student's profile in the ATBC. And once the profile is created, yeah, I'm just editing the database.
So Anne, I just want to make sure that folks got that. So what you're saying is that when the students, so we've already checked to know that they have not applied before or they've not got the status. And when they click this button, we send a note to ACBC to let them know that we have a new student that needs to be assessed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
And when the profile is created in ATBC, they will be getting this PD status as pending. And in our system, we have another API call, which is we have scheduled it in Gamulda. So like once every day, it will this API call will be calling. So basically, the functionality of this API call is like it will check the PD status of all the PD applied students. So it will take the all the student list from our SIMS database, and it will be checking each and every PD status of the students in the ATBC server. And if any of the student, if any of the PD status is updated, we got any response from the ATBC server. And if the student, if the PD status is updated, then, for example, if this student PD status is confirmed, then they will be getting this message. And if the PD status is denied from ATBC, then they will be having this message over here. And if the PD status is already verified in the SFAS DB and we get that information from SFAS DB, then there will be no button to apply for PD status. And whenever a student goes to the profile, they will be seeing this message.
And
yeah,
just to confirm, yes, ATBC is down, so they have a new service. They are doing some effort to enable that. So we are in the really preliminary phases right now. Basically, don't have the service to call, but it's getting better. We are going to be there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Anne. Awesome. So we're going to pass it over to Guru, who's going to show us program year selection, which is what's required at the very beginning for a student to get the correct application showing.
Hey, hi team. Good morning. So this is when a student is logging in the his application. So let's log in as a student. Initially, he was able to just view only one application, but now with respect to the program year, he'll be able to see different types of applications. So it is dynamically loaded. So that is the part of this. So so this is going to be started. So when he clicks on application, he'll be able to, he or she will be able to see the program year in which he has to fill the application. So for example, when I click on 2022-2023 study period between 2022, August 2022 and July 31st, 2023. Just click on the start new application. You can see like this is a separate application for the year 2022-2023. So like the complete form itself is different. So if he goes back and selects a different year here, like 2022, so this form will be dynamically generated. So this as a part of this sprint, we have developed this dynamic loading of the forms with respect to the year. Initially, we used to have a single form where the student has to just fill it out, and we do not have this program selection here. This mimics the existing solution what we have in our existing implementation. So also like tomorrow when we want to have one more year, okay, we just need to add it in the database and create a form for it in the forms flow definition. So automatically this gets loaded here, and the appropriate form will be loaded automatically as the student, dynamically for student when he starts a new application. So this is a yeah.
Thanks, Guru. So now Andrew Signori is going to show us what it looks like when a student does a file upload. So inevitably, we need students to provide some sort of proof, some documentation. And so he's going to show us how we do that.
Yep. Thank you, Michelle. So hello. Yes. So considering that student is filling the application, I'm gonna provide some data just to end up with some dependence stuff, but that's not important. The important part is what you're gonna show for the uploads. So many times the student is gonna be offered the opportunity to do a upload, and for now it's just drag and drop stuff, and you can download back and see. So when you are adding files here, it's being saved associated with the student. And when we are getting the files back, it's again associated to the student. So only the students have access to, once the file is added, it's like added to that student, only that student has access to that. Or we can have like a ministry user or someone else, but basically the file is protected, belongs to that student. For now, the multiple files is enabled, so the student can add more and more files. We have some restrictions. You can remove the files. If the student tries to upload a really big file, we have some constraints here and also in the backend. So whatever the user does to like bypass whatever validations here, the server is gonna also apply the same. So we have validations for different types of files and also for the size of the files. So the student can go and keep uploading as much as he needs. We did a small, just to show how far we can go, like we have some upload specifically for dependents. I missed something here for sure.
You always miss that one.
Always, yeah. So for dependents, we have like that auto-generated list that is also right now, maybe the future, nope, but right now we can add files here, and that's going to be associated with the dependents. So we have also the functionality. We changed a little bit this part, but we are dynamically creating new fields, and they can continue to download. Oh, sorry, upload. And that's going to be saved with the application and easily load back. We can always delete. We can upload a lot of things together. So you saw some progress bar happening. So for bigger files, it's going to be like a progress happening with the status of the upload. And it's basically that, Michelle.
Yeah, awesome.
I was just going to say, here's a good example where we still have a little bit of work to do to maybe tell people what files would be an example of what to upload, what kind of documents we're looking for. So we're showing you the basic functionality, and we'll need to go back a little bit and add some more details about what. Don't send us a picture of your grandma or a picture of your dog having breakfast, right? You know, we're looking for a copy of your tax return, or we're looking for a marriage certificate, whatever the document is. And that is probably not the right document. I'm just pulling it off the top of my head. So we'll go back and add some more language there once we get past this.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, we are cooking with gas. It's 10:35, and we can talk quickly about our goals for next sprint. And looks like there's lots of great questions this week, so we'll have plenty of time for that.
Yeah, so the next 2 weeks, of course, as hopefully everybody is doing, we do have some folks taking some time off, much deserved. So we're trying to balance our workload with people that are available. So we're going to keep working on the notice of assessment. At this point, you'll notice we haven't actually generated an application number, so we need to work on that. And this is some of the thinking. We haven't developed it yet, but we need to think about how we're going to do that. We also need to think about what are some things we might need to go back and make some adjustments to that we've already developed to improve our accessibility. From a user experience perspective, folks may recall that we did a student satisfaction survey in March to get a bit of baseline information from students. We'll be doing that again in August. That's our plan. So we need to get that set up, and we're using that to then be able to compare once we go live with the new system. Are students more satisfied? Is the process easier? Is information accessible? So we'll be doing that. Super excited, and I've talked about this a bit, but it's a big deal. We want to be able to cancel an application so that folks can see that that is no longer going to be a line of work that we are in. Students will do that themselves. We also need to continue to support institutions reporting things like withdrawals, which we haven't quite finished, but also scholastic standing. So if they're completing early or something like that. And we're going to do some work on the student dashboard. We need to figure out, now that we're getting to the end of that application and we're going to have a notice of assessment, what are students going to see on their dashboard? What's that going to look like? So we have to start thinking about that. And then, of course, the development team is going to take the work that we've done on the program information request and build it into the system, as well as building what we've shown you today around program intensity, full-time, part-time, and also some of the student application summary page, which is inside the institution account, inside the location area. So we're going to be building that. So lots of different things going on as we juggle a few holidays there as well. That's what we're working on for the next sprint. It's hard to believe we're getting close to the end of July, but yeah, we're pushing forward.
So I've taken the questions that have come in the chat and put them in our blue stickies here. And I know that you've answered some of them already in the chat, but might be good just to reiterate.
Sure. So we started the conversation around PD and PD status and being able to apply for PD status or have your PD verified outside of an application. So there's some positive points about that. Then there was this question, which is around, and this is something that we're still working on a little bit. So yes, our policy is that students that have PD status, if they are in 40% course load, that is or more, that is equivalent to full-time. And so we want those students to select full-time, not part-time, because of course the rules and the amount of funding that you get are very different. So that's why we have that quite lengthy blurb that Lynn was referring to there. But we appreciate that we might need to do some more work on that. We're hoping as well that institution users will give us some feedback on that, because of course they support students. Disability or accessibility coordinators also support students. And also we need to think about how does this work at the confirmation of enrollment process as well, because this is where for example, we might be able to catch it, but we also might need to think about what are some business rules that we could apply in saying, if your status is yes for PD, is there some extra looking at that we can do to make sure that students don't mistakenly miss out on funding that they're eligible for? So are we done? No. But certainly a good start. Does that answer the question, Ronald, or was there something else?
Well, it's really the issue of the student being declared, having a declaration of permanent disability, taking 40+% of the course load, and then when the institutions send them their T2022 statement of that they put into the tuition, education, and textbooks amounts for the deductions, the student who's got a permanent disability and is taking less than 50% gets a designation from the institution of part-time. So it's an issue between what the institutions, and the institutions are following the federal rules that says if a student is taking less than 50%, they're a part-time student. They don't consider the part or the permanent disability part of it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been discussions going on for 10 years in the ministry about what do we do about that. And, you know, it's partially the tax department and I guess in finance that's got to say, you know, how many millions of dollars are we going to lose by upgrading this to allow permanent disability students to be able to, you know, get their textbooks and tax deductions based on a full-time process. And
yeah, and I think what you're describing is really, and I think Terry, you pointed that out, is a discrepancy between the policy definition for CRA and for SFA, student financial aid. Unfortunately, from a system perspective, that's kind of out of scope for us, but certainly something that perhaps the policy team would work on. But we will be making sure that students that have a PD status that's verified are assessed if they are taking more than 40%. So, and certainly that other issue, this is not going to resolve that issue.
No, but it's not. Yeah. But it's, if the policy people start to continue to grind away on it, maybe in the next 10 years or something, we'll get around to getting it fixed. Because as I said, it's been 10 years, and it was only a year ago that we actually, Kevin Brewster said, well, it's nothing we can do. It's the tax people over in the Ministry of Finance. And I said, well, why don't you put a little blurb there in the disability saying, go talk to the tax people. Here's the guy's number to sort of push the point that something should go on. But if the policy people need to move forward on that as well.
Yeah.
As far as a technical solution, Ron, I will tell you that Andrew Schwenker is a very loud voice in our room with respect to this problem that we need to solve, and won't let us get away with not doing it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's just Miles Strathel shipping in here. This is the first I've heard of this, and I've been on this PD portfolio for a long time. It's really interesting. I'm going to follow up with you offline and
certainly
get some more information.
Great. Yep. Thank you, Miles.
Hey, Miles, Nikki here. If you can invite me to that, because I don't believe there is an issue. When it comes to full-time assessment, a 40% gets 100% of the course load. So maybe we fixed it, Ron, and you weren't aware?
No, the institutions send out the T2022, and it gives it saying it's part-time.
Right, because CRA policy is such. Yeah.
The institutions are following the federal mandate for how to fill out that T2022, and it's very hard and fast. If it's 40%, they're part-time, whether they have a disability or not.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I think what we've identified,
Miles, Nikki.
Yeah, let's.
So I think we've identified an issue that is not a technical issue, and so it sounds like, Miles, you're going to follow up with Ronald and involve Nikki in that conversation. But yeah, it sounds like it's definitely a policy issue. And unfortunately, this happens even with sometimes definition of dependent, definition of spouse, other kind of areas where policies are not aligned. And so we definitely look to our policy partners to help us with that. From a technical perspective, we're doing what we can to align with our policy as it stands today. But of course, it might change. So. Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward, just conscious of the time for the deputy meeting this morning. So we also need the schools to know a student has PD status and can be confirmed as full-time. Yes. So what I think this question, if I can double check, is saying, how are the school institution users going to know that the student has PD status? So we absolutely anticipate that the school will need to know some information about the student, and PD status is absolutely one of those pieces so that they can confirm enrollment appropriately. And please stop me if I'm not answering the question or if I'm not answering it to your satisfaction. You don't have to like the answer, but as long as I give you the answer. Did you investigate the possibility of checking with database? So yeah, we've had a lot of conversation, and Andrew, please correct me if I say this incorrectly, but my understanding is that AtWiz absolutely provides SFAS currently with the output of the assessment for verification of PD status. And so our plan at this point is to pull from the data repository. Would that be accurate, Andrew?
Yeah, so from, I think it was several sprints ago now, but once the student creates their account, basically we have a concept of basically a data repository about past students and everything, whatever we require about past students in that. And then so once they actually create their account, if they've had a PD status with us before in SFAS, for example, we will be pulling in that status in accordingly. And again, with the student integration too, like we have different mechanisms about, like, we could pre-check hundreds of students at once or whatever we want to do about that, because how the integration actually works is it is basically directly connect with ATBC's queue system. So we can be as integrated or as lightly integrated as we want between the two of us.
Right.
Yeah,
That answer?
yeah, it's Miles. Yeah, the only reason I raised that was that I know that you know, ATBC, they maintain ATWIS for us, and ATWIS is you know, going to be ongoing, whereas SFAS is going to be discontinued. I just thought that it might be just easier to use the, you know, the ATWIS database, because it's, you know, it's the first database that gets updated through the adjudication process and then communicates with SFAS subsequently.
And so this is where we'll run into it, where the first time the account is created, the system will check. But then after that, the system will, our new system will be updated and accurate. And so it's just kind of a transition piece that we'll just have to manage. And so if a student, for example, hasn't signed in to or hasn't applied for funding in 5 years, but they were assessed 6 years ago with PD status, that's where we'll gather that at the account setup, and then we'll have that and be able to move forward, and we won't need to check again because it doesn't change over time. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So has there been, I believe this next question is a follow-up to the question we were just talking about. So we'll leave that for Miles and folks to have a policy conversation about. So shifting a little bit to tuition remittance, it's done at the student application, not at the program. And so what I was answering to answer your question, Steve, is that we have enabled the ability for it to occur in both. So for example, an institution user may choose to create, and you'll notice we're starting to shift some of our language. And if you're having a hard time following, totally understand that. We've introduced the concept of an offering. So there's a program and an offering, but we've heard feedback that perhaps the word offering doesn't work very well. So we've started to shift perhaps to the use of the word intake, but now we're hearing that intake isn't perfect either. So my apologies if you hear us using a few different words. Until we land on something, you might hear a few different things. So that offering will have the capacity for the institution user to add a tuition remittance to the offering. That means that all students that select that will have tuition remittance. We don't anticipate that a lot of institutions will use that because tuition remittance is generally, from what we understand, used more for individual students in individual unique circumstances. And so that's why we've also added the capacity for the school institution user to add the tuition remittance to a unique student's program piece, which would then trigger and ensure the student has the ability to say, yep, that's okay, it can keep going, or no, the school can't take the funding, because that was our decision. So we've added it to both.
Thanks, Elise. That's helpful.
Yep. It would be a great feature if uploads could be further limited to PDF. So yeah, that's something we could think about. The problem is that as soon as we start creating limitations, there'll always be some exception. So for example, it's a PDF. Often PDFs are definitely a better document than say a Word document, but then someone might take a picture of a document and send it to it. And if we don't accept a JPEG, then we run into issues. So we want to be as flexible as possible and then maybe do a look back and see what happens. So at this point in time, we're definitely built it to be as flexible, but we'll have to think about what are the directions that we tell students. Wade, do you want to speak up about that?
Thanks, Elise. Yeah, sure. Actually, there's actually further commentary there between me and Andrew. I mean, ideally PDF only would be great, but other graphics formats are totally fine too, because absolutely you're right, recognizing that a lot of times students just take their phones and just snap a picture of the camera and send that, and that's totally fine. The main thing is with any of the editable type like Word and Excel documents, first of all, they really take forever to load when we're loading them from a web link. It just it really kills a lot of time, and a lot of time, like if we don't have the same fonts installed that they're using, say if they're writing a letter, there's other complications. Plus DocX and XLSX, the newest versions of those can contain bad things that our systems really won't like. Malware. It's pretty darn rare, but it's possible in a way that it just isn't possible on a JPEG or a PDF. So I guess the main thing out of that is looking at the current state is I really would like to see Word documents and Excel documents go away. All of those softwares have the ability to save as PDF internally. We're not asking students to do anything, crazy or weirdly outside of their sandbox. But anyways, yes, but yes, as you rightly pointed out in my first statement, yeah, graphic format's all good, totally fine.
Yeah, it's a good point. So we'll have to think about if we want to limit. I'll just answer the next question if I'm right, Andrew Signori. I believe the note was 4 megs was the size limitation at this point. And again, these are things that we can configure, I believe. So if we're finding that people aren't able to send documents, or it's too much, or if we only want them to send one, we can limit it. So at this point, we've configured this as flexible as possible. And I think once we live in it for a little bit and start to see usage, we can then start to build some limits. But we can also, and this is where we would probably be asking in our user testing, what might you upload here? Those kinds of questions. I don't want to assume that, but we can ask the users and the institution users, depending on who they are, what's needed so that we get their input and consider that as well. So for MVP, I know my approach is definitely build it as flexible as possible.
Hi, Elise, it's Miles. The reason I brought that question up was that we've had problems with the students uploading medical documents to their dashboard, and I think it's a 2 meg limit now. And yeah, so when somebody's uploading like a psychoed assessment or something, it's really taxing the the capacity of the system. So 4 meg sounds great. I don't know if that's enough, but certainly something that could probably use some additional investigation.
Yeah, we'll have to pay attention to that for sure. I will point out that in this new system, of course, students will not be sending us any medical information. That would be going straight to @BC. We will not be collecting medical information because we don't need to have it. So once the PD status, they want to have that verified, that little note goes to @BC. @BC will reach out to them and work with them directly. So that issue of psychoed assessments, those kinds of documents are not the documents that we would ever be asking be uploaded. So hopefully that may help to resolve that issue as well. But I know that Appendix 8s can get big, really big. But,
okay.
Yep. So the next question is about kind of essentially, I think the question is really saying, what's the definition of full-time or part-time? And absolutely correct is that we allow the institution to decide what they consider full-time or part-time because of the unique needs of the program. And so this is where our partners are so important, because you may only be taking one class, but that might be considered full-time by the institution. And so that's where the institution does their due diligence when they're reviewing, when they're confirming, all of those kinds of things to say, oh, that's not a part-time. And that would trigger a reassessment, right? Because they're editing some of that information, and that would trigger a reassessment for the student. Either, for example, they thought they were part-time because it was only one class. Nope, that would trigger full-time, or the other way around. So we want to make sure to have that ability. And definitely recognize that. And of course, a lot of our private institutions don't work in courses, right? They might work in hours. And so we need to ensure that they have the flexibility as well to decide what they consider full-time. There are some minimum standards in our policy, though. So I think there was 2 extra questions I saw you adding. The first one is the IER file, and I saw a question that was like, what is the IFAR? Let's see. This is the Individualized Education Report. Is that what it stands for? Oh, I got it wrong. What did it stand for?
Integrated Electronic Record.
Integrated. Oh, for God's sakes, I completely got it wrong. Okay, I thought I was doing so well. So this is where currently SABC basically pushes out to public institutions only a very comprehensive amount of data that we receive from the student on I think it's nightly basis, or on a regular basis. We push that information out to schools. So it sounds like schools currently, and I'm pretty sure this was probably a Stephanie comment. Yeah. So they often get that information. So going forward, we'll need to have some conversation about this as to how do we share that. The schools are aware that we're only going to be able to share what we have the authority to share as per privacy. And so we'll have to do some working out. And so we don't know exactly yet what information we'll be sharing or how often or how we'll be sharing that. That's still in progress, but that's what that is. So helpful information for folks to know. But we absolutely do know that schools need to know whether or not the student has PD status, because that's a critical piece of information for them. Will there be remittance for full-time and part-time? Oh, good question. So yeah, we're not, tuition remittance is tuition remittance. So we're not, we have not considered any rules at this point to allow it on one or not the other. We're simply making sure that we can comply with the policy, which limits it to the no more than the education cost for that application period. And the absolute goal here, which was one of our strategic opportunities, was to ensure that students had more transparency and insight into the tuition remittance, and that they can pull the cord on it. They will have the ability to say, school, you may want it, but no, you can't have it, because it's their funding, and that's the decision that we've gone with. But you'll notice that we're not putting that out in the forefront. Most schools don't use tuition remittance. It is not something that's used by all of the schools. Such a fairly small percentage of the schools that use it. And so it's something that we don't want to make bigger than it already is.
Great, thank you. So we are out of time. We have to head to the Deputy Minister discussion, but if you have additional questions, please feel free to email the mod team or anyone individually on this call, any of our team members, and we will make sure to get that prioritized in the backlog or a response to you back. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, all.